On today's Hashi, I'm discussing the FOMC meeting, Fed Chairman Jerome Powell's comments on housing, the job openings and labor turnover report for March, as well as the weekly unemployment. Today is Thursday, May the 2nd, 2024. I am Byron Lazine, and the Hot Sheet starts now. It is a Jerome Powell day. I look forward to this day every 45 days. I'm like, when could the next Jerome Powell day be? I actually just got a text message. Um, it was Jerome's assistant, and Jerome's assistant said, "Hey, we saw the Kevin Sears interview. President of National Association of Realtors. Jerome would love an interview. So I think there's a Jerome Powell interview coming. No, that's actually never going to happen. He would never do that." But Haley suggested that. I don't know if she didn't get a lot of sleep last night or what. I don't think we're going to get Jerome Powell here on the Hot Sheet or on a BAM interview, but we will, as we do every single day after he does a press conference, break down all of the angles, the tone, what was said inside of the press conference. And specifically, we've pulled out of the transcript in both written word and in video. We've pulled out every moment Jerome Powell mentioned housing. We're going to cover all of that. But first, let me give you the 30,000-foot view of the meeting, what we know about it now. Obviously, the Fed meetings will come out later, and what Jerome Powell's decision was. So for the April 30th, May 1st FOMC meeting, we probably know this by now, the Federal Reserve held interest rates steady at the 5.25 to 5.5% target. It's the federal target rate. Okay. Fed Chair Jerome Powell stated it's unlikely the Fed would resume hiking rates, even if inflation takes longer than expected to come down. So Jerome Powell said it's unlikely that they will resume hiking. Okay. There's really three things they can do when they come out of these meetings. They can hike, they could cut, or they could do what they did yesterday, which is stay the same. Okay, so he's taken one of those off the table. Okay, it's not likely that we would hike even if inflation takes longer than expected. So to me, that was a win. I think the market, the 10-year, even the 30-year yesterday reacted as though that was a win, as though that was a positive comment, because there was fear going in yesterday. How hawkish is he going to be? Is there going to be an indication that we could be in danger of seeing a rate hike? He made it very clear. I don't expect, meaning Jerome Powell, expect that the next move, meaning the next time they meet in about 45 days for the FOMC meeting, mid-June, he does not expect that at that meeting, their next move will be to raise the interest rate. So that leaves, again, staying or cutting. We'll get into, what he thinks what they're going to do there. When he talks about economic growth, before we get into the housing, we've got, he mentioned housing a total of 5 times, twice in the prepared statements, 3 times in the Q&A. We're going to cover that in detail. Okay. It's the only place you get a 24-hour look back on housing on the internet, Monday through Thursday. Of course, is the Hot Sheet. So looking at the economy, it impacts housing in a lot of different ways. Economic activity in the FOMC standpoint has continued at a solid pace. Okay, so while we had a GDP miss in quarter one, you could actually argue that was good for the Fed to have a miss on GDP in quarter one. They don't want the economy to overheat. You also don't want it to start declining. So the GDP miss, you could argue, in quarter one was a middle of the road, maybe more alignment of that soft landing strategy that they're trying to pull off. So GDP miss, now that there's already an Atlanta Fed projection for quarter two, that quarter two GDP is going to be like, almost triple where we came in at quarter one. I've read a couple of places that there's a lot of this stimulus money that hasn't been spent by the states that comes due in June, and there might be a rush to spend some of that might obviously impact things here in quarter two, and could be a concern, obviously, for inflation. If there's more money going into the system, all that money that we printed that hasn't been spent yet, the states only really get to use it if they spend it, allocate it to something. So we'll see how that works out in relation to GDP and obviously inflation. On jobs in the economy, they've remained strong. The unemployment rate is low. So check. Jerome Powell is giving himself a little feather in the old cap. I wouldn't call it like a Cam Newton cap, but putting a slight feather in his cap there. Inflation concerns. Inflation has eased over the past year, but remains above the desired level. So acknowledging, hey, when you look at it on a 12-month run, it's eased. When you look at it on a 3-month run, the numbers aren't as good, and it's certainly above the desired level of the 2% target. There's been no recent progress towards the committee's 2% inflation goal. So he acknowledges, hey, when you look in the short term, we're not making progress right now. You look longer term, we've made a lot of progress. We were at 8 or 9% inflation at one point at the high peaks. Committee aims for a maximum employment and 2% inflation rate over the longer run. That's their only mandate. I thought it was interesting too. He said this every single press conference, every single time they come out of these meetings. He says, our mandate from Congress is aim for maximum employment and have a 2% inflation run over the longer run. He addressed what I've alluded to as a possibility, that as we get closer to November, there's going to be a lot of pressure from the White House, certainly, to start cutting. If the current administration wants to get reelected, they want to get into that real heavy campaign season, which picks up typically in a presidential election after the summer. They really want to go into that season with a strong economy. They want to point towards low unemployment. They want it to remain there. They want the GDP to continue to grow. They would love to see interest, the Fed start cutting the rates so that the economy feels better for more. And there'll be pressure there. But I thought it was interesting that he acknowledged that being something that's been talked about, and that the FOMC will not succumb to those pressures. I'm paraphrasing there of exactly what he said, but he will not. They're not a political arm, he said, and they will not succumb to those pressures. Obviously, we'll see how that plays out, but I thought that was interesting that he addressed that. I thought that was not unique, but certainly worth noting that, okay, he's hearing the chatter that there's a belief that there could be pressure from the White House, just as there was in the last administration, just as there was in the administration before that. Presidents like to try to pressure and influence any way that they can, even though they know that they're not supposed to make political decisions. And he addressed that and said that's not going to happen on his watch. Cool. Got it. Monetary policy goals. The committee aims for maximum employment. We got that part. The target rate range for federal funds obviously maintained at the 5.25% and 5.5%. The committee will continue reducing its holdings of Treasury securities and agency debt. The pace of reduction in Treasury securities will slow down with the monthly redemption cap reduced to $60 billion to $25 billion. So interesting there. The monthly redemption cap for agency debt and mortgage-backed securities remains at $35 billion, with excess investment reinvested into Treasury securities. Okay, so that's the overall 30,000-foot view. Now, let's go into the FOMC press conference. This is where we've got 5 instances when Jerome Powell brought up housing and the housing market. So twice in the prepared statements, once at 2 minutes in. I'll read this one, then we'll go to some of the video reactions and we'll react to that. 2 minutes in, consumer spending has been robust over the past several quarters. By the way, all the transcript on housing, it's available for you in your hot sheet show notes, as well as the timestamps. So BAMX members, you've got that loaded up inside of BAMX on the show notes, as well as all the slides from today as well. You can use code HOT to get a discount off of BAMX. Make sure you do that. Consumer spending has been robust over the past several quarters, even as high interest rates have weighed on housing and equipment investment. Improving supply conditions have supported resilient demand and the strong performance of the U.S. economy over the past year. So, he said this in the past, what their restrictive policies have done have weighed on housing the most. Certainly it is interest rate sensitive. We get that. Housing has been the sector that's been in a recession for the last 2 years, while the economy has not. Okay. At 3 minutes 50, in the prepared statement, still, colleagues and I are acutely aware that high inflation imposes significant hardship as it erodes purchasing power, especially for those least able to meet the higher costs of essentials like food, housing, and transportation. We're strongly committed to return inflation 2% objective. Think about those folks right now that are looking for, affordable home purchases, or below affordable home purchase price, or below the median home price in your market. It's very hard for them to go out there and get that deal done. It's very difficult for that buyer. And what happens a lot of times to that buyer is they get grinded out of this market. They get pushed out of this market, and then they have to make the decision on whether they want to extend that non-wealth building activity of renting. It's an unfortunate situation that they're faced with, an unfortunate decision there, and he acknowledges that. It's not his job from Congress to fix that problem, by the way. Congress could help potentially fix that problem, the affordability of homes. It's not, I want to be clear, it's not Jerome Powell's mandate from Congress, to even care about housing, affordability and home ownership rates. We went over home ownership rates earlier in the week. He doesn't care about that. His maximize employment, 2% target on inflation. So if that means more renters, and so if you think about the mandate from our government to the Federal Reserve and the lack of effort put in by the government to go ahead and help, housing supply at the affordable level, you do start to scratch your head and say, geez, do they really care about home ownership at all? Do they really care about the long-term wealth of Americans, or do they buy into the theory that, hey, more Americans renting is the path that we want to go down, that renter nation theory that we've heard before? All right, so there's a first question once he goes into the Q&A portion of the press conference, and the Q&A portion probably usually lasts about 45, 50 minutes each time. This one comes in early at 7-minute, 50-second mark of the entire conference. It's Howard Schneider from Reuters asked the question, and there's some discussion here as it relates to as it relates to us in the housing market. So let's take a look at Howard's question from Reuters.
Thank you. Howard Schneider with Reuters. A question to follow up, if I could. Do you consider the current policy rate still? Are you confident that it's sufficiently restrictive to get inflation back to 2%?
So I do think the evidence shows, pretty clearly that policy is restrictive and is weighing on demand. And there are a few places I would point to for that. You can start with the labor market. So demand is still strong, the demand side of the labor market in particular, but it's cooled from its extremely high level of a couple of years ago. And you see that in job openings. You saw it, more evidence of that today in the JOLTS report, as you'll know. It's still higher than pre-pandemic, but it has been coming down both in the Indeed report and in the JOLTS report. That's demand cooling. The same is true of quits and hiring rates, which have essentially normalized. I also look at surveys of workers and surveys of workers and businesses, and ask workers, are jobs plentiful? And ask businesses, are workers plentiful? Is it easy to find workers? And you've seen that the answers to those have come back down to pre-pandemic levels. You also see in interest-sensitive spending like housing and investment, you also see that higher interest rates are weighing on those activities. So I do think it's clear that that policy is restrictive.
Okay, there you go. On that question, I think this was one of the biggest takeaways from yesterday. It's why there was nothing crazy that happened. Everybody woke up this morning, completely survived the Jerome Powell and FOMC meeting. In fact, yesterday, all the markets ticked up a little bit. S&P, Dow, NASDAQ, all ticked up. 10-year ticked down slightly. 30-year ticked down slightly. Like everybody came out of that saying, no, there wasn't anything really crazy There wasn't any hawkish tone. And so he's acknowledging the current policy is restrictive. He said it's unlikely that more hikes are going to be the next move or potentially in the future. So that only leaves staying or potentially reducing. Let's go to the next question when he gets into housing a little bit. We know that the rates have been very restrictive to housing. We're near the bottom of total sales in the last 25 years. It's really slowed down the flow of transaction. We know that there's demand in the background, but those rates have to meet that demand. So let's go to the next question. This comes in just under the 20-minute mark. It's a follow-up question from Steve Leisman from CNBC. Let's take a look at this because this one's interesting as well.
What particular areas were sort of temporary or blips in the inflation data in the first quarter? And what's the dynamic by which you expect them to work out in the coming months and quarters?
Yeah. So we will, we will put the thing under a microscope. I will say nothing is going to come out of that that's going to change the view. I think that, in fact, we didn't gain confidence and that it's going to take longer to get that confidence. But confidence, I just think you know the story. What's happened since December is you've seen higher goods inflation than expected, and you've seen higher non-housing services inflation than expected, and those two are working together to sort of be higher than we had thought. And there are stories behind how that happened, and I think my expectation is that we will, over the course of this year, see inflation move back down. That's my forecast. I think my confidence in that is lower than it was because of the data that we've seen. So we're looking at those things. We also continue to expect, and I continue to expect, that housing services inflation, given where market rents are, those will show up in measured housing services inflation over time. We believe that it will. It looks like that there are substantial lags between when lower market rates turned up and for new tenants, and when it shows up for existing tenants or for in housing services. So
yeah, we just follow up. Is there a bit of a contradiction in the idea that you are?
We don't need this follow up. Okay, so we've been waiting for the data in CPI and housing inflation to show up reflective to what a lot of markets are experiencing. We looked at it yesterday. Asking rents are down 8 months in a row. That's according to Realtor.com. It's been 8 months in a row that asking rents are coming down. The rent price appreciation has completely stabilized across the board, and that's been for the better part of a year or a year plus in some markets. It's due to an oversupply of apartment building. Those are still coming online, of course. The disparity between renting and buying a home is getting wider and wider with how expensive it is to purchase a home and all of that. So we're waiting for that to show up, and it's just like, and he says it here, it's just it's taking longer, I think, than maybe even he expected. I can go back to March of last year of 2023 when Barry Sternlight called it, who's monitoring 125,000 doors that Starwood Capital owns and operates. And he's like, it's coming down. It's stabilizing. It's reducing. He was calling for cuts back then. That's 15 months ago. And we obviously haven't gotten there yet. But rents are coming down, and these are substantial lags of showing up in the data. We've got 8 months now of asking rents being lower. And so, when will those show up actually in the real data? That remains to be seen, but we're hopeful that'll be soon. The last time he actually addresses housing is about just over 38 minutes in. The question's asked from Courtney Brown from Axios. Let's take a look at the question and Jerome's response.
Courtney Brown from Axios. Thanks for taking our questions, Chair Powell. I wanted to follow up on something you mentioned earlier on housing inflation. There's kind of been this long-awaited disinflation in shelter that still hasn't arrived. So I guess two questions. How do you explain the substantial lags between some of the private sector data we're seeing and the government data? And how confident are you that rents will be helpful on the inflation front in the coming months?
Okay, pause it right there.
So
Courtney Brown asked the best question, because it's what we were just talking about, right? The private sector data, that's what I just referenced and we talked about yesterday's hot sheet, realtor.com, 8 months consecutive asking rents coming down. We've seen it in other, we've covered here every time we get a report. We've seen in other indications, right? And then you look at the government data, the CPI, and they use things like owner's equivalent rent, which is a made up, phony, make believe number. It's not even real data. It's not apartments.com. It's not CoStar. It's not realtor.com. It's not even Redfin. It's just people making stuff up. And so she asked, how confident are you that rents will be helpful on the inflation front in the coming months? This is what we're waiting for. If you actually take real-time data, and we've looked at this, there was that Wall Street Journal report where if you took owner's equivalent rent out, which is a made up phony, it's a survey that people who are not in the rental game say what my house would rent for if I had to go rent it. People, that they've lived in their house 20 years and still have a house phone. How confident are you in that data? If you took owner's equivalent rent right now out of CPI, we'd have much lower inflation. So I love the question. Let's go to Powell's response to it.
essentially, there are a number of places in the economy where there are just lag structures built into the inflation process, and housing is one of them. So when you have when someone a new person goes to rent an apartment, that's called market rent, and you can see market rents are barely going up at all. The inflation in those has been very low, but it takes before that they were incredibly high. They sort of led the high part. So what happens is those market rents take years actually to get all the way into rents for tenants who are rolling over their leases. Landlords don't tend to charge as much of an increase to a rollover tenant for whatever reason. And what that does is it builds up a sort of an unrealized portion of increases when there have been big increases. And what happens is, it's complicated, but the story is it just takes some time for that to get in. Now, I am confident that as long as market rents remain low, this is going to show up in measured inflation, assuming that market rents do remain low. What will be the exact timing of it? I think we've learned that the lags are longer. We now think significantly longer than we thought at the beginning. And so confident that it will come, but not so confident in the timing of it. But yes, I expect that this will happen.
Thanks.
We've been talking about this for over a year, that rents are coming down with real-time data, and we're still waiting for it to come up in a 1980s system of how we calculate inflation. He talks about how these, the calculations as it relates to rental numbers is very complicated. And I'm certain that it is. I mean, to his point, when you have leases that are being signed, a lease that was signed 2 years ago, what was actually paid over those 12 months? What did they actually renew for? That, to his point, that does take years. Got it. Cool. But could it be that the system that we haven't changed on how we're really calculating inflation that we've been using since the 80s, could it be updated a little bit to make it less complicated, to at least let it reflect more of a real-time approach? Because he addresses it at the end, the exact time of it. What will be the exact time of it? I think we've learned that lags are longer. We now think significantly longer. We thought that at the beginning. So I'm confident it'll, but I'm not so confident on the timing. But yes, I expect it to happen. I mean, I don't know. He went back and forth with himself about 10 times there when he finished the question. It's like, yes, no, yes, why, maybe, right? Okay, we get it. The data is lagging. We also understand that the system being used, this 1980 system of how we calculate inflation, is a little bit outdated. I think owner's equivalent rent should completely go away. Surveying homeowners that don't have any knowledge of really what the market is doing, they've been living in their house 20, 15, 10 years, is an irrelevant data point. I'd rather add in real-time data points like CoreLogic, Realtor.com, Apartments.com, CoStar. What are the real-time rents looking like right now? And if you project those out 12, 24 months, what would that do to the inflation numbers and the data? So listen, anytime you talk to somebody who's just living in their home and they've seen the last 2 years, let's just go to home prices for a minute. They've seen the prices and the multiple offers that have happened in the last 2 years. Well, now if you're in the Sunbelt states, and you're seeing inventory go up, might be a little bit of a different market expectation, days on market. Their price, they might have seen a record price. Well, geez, last year so-and-so got 850. Their house isn't better than mine, so I think my house is worth 900. Well, it might be actually worth 825 because 850 was updated. It was a record price. And really, the comps average out to 810, and you'd be lucky to get 825. Everybody thinks their house is worth more or would rent for more than maybe it would actually being tested on the market. Current asking rates, which we covered yesterday, are being tested in the open marketplace. It's not what somebody thinks. And so, unfortunately, the answer is Jerome Powell has no idea when it's going to show up in the data. I think we've learned that the lags are longer. We now think significantly longer than we thought in the beginning. I'm confident it will come, but not so confident on the timing. He has no idea of the timing of when real-time shelter inflation, housing inflation is going to drop out of the inflation data. And so at that, you could just argue like we just don't know when we're going to get closer to the 2% target. If Jerome doesn't know, there's no way we're going to know. All right. That's your update there. If you are a BAMX member, Hot Sheet show notes are just fully loaded up. We've gotten through the first two segments, which is the FOMC meeting. You've got all the timestamps of when he talked about housing there. Use code HOT if you're not a BAMX member. Tomorrow, every Friday, we drop BAMX in a box where you get at least 3 social templates done for you. Those social templates are the data coming out of the Hot Sheet. It's stuff that we test and we design for you. You can brand it for yourself, as well as 2 video scripts and an email script. Every single Friday, BAMX members are getting that content done for them, BAMX in a box. All right, job openings and labor turnover. The U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics released the job openings. Jerome talked about that and the JOLTS report for March 2024. A little change in job openings. Jerome mentioned that, hey, job openings are back to pre-pandemic levels. So this is good news that the supply and demand for jobs has normalized. The number of job openings on the last business day of March 2024 was 8.5 billion. So that's well off of that 11 million. That's well off of the 11 million plus that we saw at the peak for job openings, showing little change though from the previous month. However, this number was down by 1.1 million compared to the same period last year. So job openings continuing to come down, meaning the supply is coming down. We're getting more of an equilibrium as it relates to supply and demand on jobs. The number of hires in March 2024 remains stable at 5.5 million. And so there you go. Just kind of recapping there what Jerome said, that they are in a good place on job openings back to pre-pandemic levels, as well as unemployment. The advanced figure for seasonally adjusted initial claims for the week ending April 27th was 208,000. And that is really unchanged. Unemployment remains very low. Here are the states with the highest insured unemployment rates. You've got New Jersey, California, Illinois, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Minnesota, New York, Washington, Alaska, and Nevada. The states with the largest increases in initial claims would be Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Texas, Colorado, and California. Largest decreases would be New York, Pennsylvania, Oregon, Georgia, and Washington. Okay, so there's your localized look at unemployment. Unemployment, though, is relatively, even when you see those increases and whatnot, I mean, we've been running at such a flat number here for so long. Unemployment has been running extremely low for some period of time now. And that until that changes, we probably see that's the big argument on rates until the job market breaks. You probably will be in a higher interest rate situation for longer as it relates to the 30-year fixed. Yesterday, I'll go to the 1-day look here. And at 4 o'clock, if you're watching, not listening, the chart here on the 30-year fixed, it dropped all the way down to 4.59. So under 4.6. It's been almost a month, so we've been down there when Jerome Powell came out and said, we're holding rates firm and that it was more so when he said we don't expect to be hiking in the future. And then that's kind of jumped back up here, I guess, as we come back to reality. We're at 4.63 on the 10-year. Yesterday's 30-year fixed read did come down from the 7.51 the day prior. So we started May yesterday at 7.41 on the 30-year fixed. All right. That's your hot sheet for the week. It's the only place on the internet to get a 24-hour look back on the housing market every single Monday through Thursday, 9:30 on the East, 6:30 on the West. If you're new to the show, make sure that you go down below, hit the subscribe, hit the notification bell. Again, we do this every single Monday through Thursday. If there's breaking news on a Friday or another day, boom, I'll just go live and bring it to you if it's really important to address. Obviously, here on the channel, we still have all of our normal content like the Real Word podcast and the interviews. I did an interview with Lacey Conway, who just sold an over 100-year brokerage, Ladder & Bloom, to Compass. We talk about that. We talk about her thoughts on NAR. She's a powerful professional in the industry, really smart, impressive. So go check out that interview if you haven't done so already. And if you haven't made a decision yet on where you should be at the end of June 25th to June 27th, I'd encourage you to take a look at the 1,000-watt Brand and Marketing Summit. We're going to be answering the wake-up call there. It's an event for those who want to meet the moment with confidence. It's for doers, not pontificators. When you go to the 1,000-watt Brand and Marketing Summit, it's CMOs, it's marketing managers, it's broker owners, it's broker leaders, it's team leaders, it's really high-performing agents who want to have a special brand and marketing plan inside of their community so that no matter what changes happen in the industry, their brand can supersede those. Those are the type of players in the room. You can use BAM on that link for the 1,000-watt summit to get the lowest price possible on that. William Burton from Charleston interview with Lacey Conway was fantastic, super insightful industry leader. She is so smart. She started off as an agent, worked her way up to obviously be the CEO of Ladder & Bloom, 100+ year brokerage. They just made the decision to sell the brokerage to Compass. 3,600+ agents came over in that transition. It's interesting. You might see more of these legacy brands, independent brands, make a decision like that. We get into that. But Lacey is just somebody, I don't think enough people in the industry, unless you're in that Gulf Coast region, that Gulf Coast in Texas, South Mississippi, Louisiana, where the bulk of their market is. You probably certainly know Lacey if you're in there. But if you're in the industry and you just you haven't heard Lacey speak before or don't know, she is one of the smartest minds in the industry. And I was really honored to have that time to sit down with her and the interviews up here on the Now BAM YouTube channel. We also had that session with Amy Stockberger yesterday about lifetime clients that Steve's talking about here in the comments. Thank you for showing up to the session yesterday. For BAMX members, on this coming Wednesday, we're going to do another session with Amy, and it'll be on a BAMX Zoom where we can actually go around and ask specific questions. She's going to spend a ton of time upcoming here with the BAMX community on how to build this network of lifetime clients. And so I'm looking forward to that. If you're not on BAMX yet, use code HOT. Do it today so you get the drop for tomorrow and get access to all of the BAM in a box content that we're delivering to you each and every single Friday, as well as things like next Wednesday when we do office hours with Amy. All right. Great week. Really appreciate all of you guys here. Love doing this with you every single morning. And until next time, of course, toodaloo.